Hello and welcome everyone to this past marathon, Modernizing Your Data Platform. We're excited you could join us today for Ramnik, Gulati and Jake Smith's session, Azure Data Estate Modernization. This past marathon features back-to-back live webinars delivered by expert speakers from the PaaS community. The sessions will be recorded and posted online after the event. You will receive an email letting you know when the recordings are available in due course. My name is Mark Broadbent and I'll be your host today. I run the PaaS Hybrid virtual group, SQL Saturday Cambridge and the East Anglian Data Platform User Group. I have a few introductory slides before I hand over the reins to Ramnik and Jake, so apologies, just bear with me and I'll try and get through them as soon as possible. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, cool. If you require technical assistance, type your request into the question pane located on the right side of your screen and someone will assist you. This question pane is also where you may ask any questions throughout the presentation. Feel free to enter your questions at any time, and once we get to the Q&A portion of the session, I'll read your questions aloud to Ramnik and Jake. We also have somebody on board who'll try to answer your questions throughout the session as well. So you get two for the price of one there. You are able to zoom in on the presentation content by using the zoom button located on the top of the presentation window. Please note there will be a short evaluation at the end of the session which will pop up after the webinar ends in your web browser. Your feedback is really important to us for future events, so please take a moment to complete this. In the lead up to the SQL Server 2008 end of support, we've recruited Sandy, an expert in all things migration, along with an all-star lineup of speakers from Microsoft and Intel to smoothly guide you to your final destination, a modern data platform. Whether you're interested in moving to an updated on-premise, cloud or hybrid solution, PaaS, Microsoft, Intel and Sandy, of course, have teamed up for a must-attend series of webinars, in-person events and migration resources dedicated to giving you the tools you need to migrate with confidence. Visit paas.org/modernization.aspx, and that's modernization spelt with a Z, not an S, to see the collection of on-demand videos, helpful blogs, presentation slides, and other industry-leading learning content from PaaS, Microsoft, and Intel. Next. This past marathon session is presented by Ramnik and Jake. Ramnik has been with Microsoft now for over 12 years and is responsible for the marketing of SQL Server and Azure, and for the last 6 years has led the marketing for the SQL Server business from a core product marketing perspective. Jake has worked over the last 20 years in introducing new technologies in the server, storage and mobile computing markets. He currently focuses on the development of non-volatile memory, virtualization, security, manageability, storage and Intel Select solutions for data centers. Jake and his team are currently working to drive standards and interoperability of cloud computing, NVM and storage for Intel. And you'll be pleased to hear that's enough waffle from me. So without further ado, here is Ramnik and Jake with Azure Data Estate Modernization.
Thank you. Welcome everyone. And I'd like to welcome my colleague as well from Intel, Jake Smith. So let's just quickly discuss what we'll be walking you through today and discussing in this session. Essentially, we want to walk you through the innovations that both Microsoft and Intel are bringing to help you modernize your data estate. And when we say that, we mean both your on-premises data center as well as your cloud computing environments. So we want to cover all of this. And so with that, let's get going. All right. So essentially, from on the Microsoft side, there are three core patterns that we've been observing, and it'll be interesting to see, if you're as also observing similar patterns within your industry, within your company. But essentially, the patterns that we're noticing is that data is growing at an incredible rate. The other one is this notion of cloud computing. I've been with Microsoft quite some time, met with customers. When I met with customers 3, 4, maybe even 5 years ago, the percentage of them that were actually adopting cloud-first strategies was much lower than what we see today. And even this notion of AI is really taken off, where we're seeing companies invest significant amounts of dollars and resources to essentially go from hindsight to foresight, whereas in the past, they were looking at historical data to make business decisions. And now they're looking at machine learning models based on that data to actually forecast their business. So these are 3 patterns that we're seeing. The first one, hopefully, nobody will challenge me on. I would ask you, if you look back in the last 5 years, has your data shrunk in the last 5 years? If you're a healthy company, probably it hasn't, probably it's grown. So these are core patterns that we've been observing. And one of the interesting things we did was a couple years back, we conducted a research study with Keystone, and they went out and talked to enterprise customers in financial services, retail, manufacturing, consumer goods, and you see some of the names. They actually talked to over 350 enterprises. And what they were doing was to basically assess these companies. Think of it like almost like an MQ or a Magic Quadrant on maturity. And they assessed each company through, I think, a 75 or 80 question survey on maturity when it comes to data technologies that they're adopting, maturity when it comes to cloud computing, maturity when it comes to that scale I just talked about for AI, where are they still in hindsight, are they making business decision only based on historical data, or have they actually started to build machine learning models to actually forecast their business? That kind of a spectrum. And what was interesting, and by the way, this study is publicly available, we're happy to share it with you. But what was interesting here was Keystone was looking for patterns, right? So let's look at these companies, and they basically, let's just say for retail, categorized them and said, hey, here's a company that's more mature in these 3 areas, and here's one that's more at a more basic stage when it comes to data technologies, when it comes to cloud computing, when it comes to AI. And do we notice any pattern in terms of business performance when these companies are more mature in these areas versus those that are not? And here's the pattern that the study found. It's pretty interesting. So, I would almost ignore the 100 million the 100 million number, because there's commercial banks. If you look carefully in the financial services, they're commercial banks. And so to a large commercial bank, 100 million may not be much, but there were also medium-sized organizations where 100 million would be significant. But more importantly, the pattern where I would focus on are the 2 words at the bottom of each of the columns there. Nearly double the operating margin and additional operating income. So what the report showed was those companies that are far more advanced in these 3 areas were outperforming their competitors consistently in operating margin and operating income by a significant amount. So I know many of you may be on this journey, you're on this journey, AI journey, modern data technology journey, or cloud adoption journey, or you may already be well along the way. It's good to kind of look back and kind of go, okay, well, what are we gaining out of this? And so what the study basically showed is there's a lot to gain, and we'll talk about more customer stories here and some of the gains they've had by advancing their data initiatives, their cloud initiatives, and their AI initiatives. So the other part of this study that Keystone did was they also looked at these companies that were more modern, that were investing in these 3 areas, and said, hey, look, what does your data estate look like now versus, let's say 5, 6 years ago? How are you thinking about data across your data estate? And this diagram basically depicts how these customers in the far right quadrant are thinking about their data. So one of the key things is the requirement to ingest any kind of data, relational, non-relational, structured, unstructured. It doesn't matter. Whereas 5, 6, 7 years ago, it might have been primarily relational data stored in operational data databases or in data warehouses. And today they have sensor data. and that doesn't belong necessarily in an operational database, and maybe more in a data lake. So customers are ingesting, more data than ever before, which leads to the point that we saw that data is growing. Where is it coming from? It's coming from these sensors. It's coming from customers storing more of their data of, behavior data of their customers, so they can deliver a better customer experience for their end customer. So that's one of the key requirements. The other is this notion of hybrid. So this is interesting. So, at past summit, if any of you attended Rohan's keynote last year or the year before, he always asks that question, and we asked the audience this last time as well, which was, how many of you are planning to shut down your data centers and move everything to a public cloud environment? And a small percentage of hands went up. He then asked, how many of you will never embrace a public cloud environment and only retain within your data center? And a few hands went up. And then he asked, well, how many of you plan to have your applications and data both in your data center and embrace public cloud environments where you as a customer decide where things go? And as you can guess, the majority of hands in his keynote, when you look back in the audience, went up. And that's a global representation, right? At past summit, we get people, customers from all over the world. And this is what our data shows as well, that customers are planning to architect for a hybrid environment, not just today, but 5 years from now, where they will, for the most part, retain both their data center as well as embrace public cloud environments and decide where things go based on their needs, based on their criteria, based on their compliance requirements, based on their organizational requirements. And at Microsoft, we realize this, and what we're optimizing for is helping our customers no matter where they are. If they want to, manage their data and AI workloads within their data center, well, how can we help them? How can we make their lives easier? If they want to, embrace them in public cloud environments like Azure, well, how do we make that easier for them? How do we drive a richer experience there than they can get within their data center? Because again, when you're in Azure, there's a lot of things that we can do to make your lives easier in terms of managing that data, of implementing analytics and AI over that data, to making backups, patching, and all of that stuff easy for you. So essentially, this is it. And then often when we ask customers, well, why are you re-architecting your data estate along these lines? Essentially, it comes down to what's on that bottom line, which is customers want to reason over all their data. Just having that sensor data sit in a data lake is not of much use unless you can connect it to that historical customer data that's sitting in a operational database, right? That's when you start to get value, where you can say, here's what my customer's been doing. Here's the patterns that we're seeing. Here's how we can give them a better service or a better product. So essentially, that's the reason why, what we've heard, why customers are investing significantly to modernize their data estate. So let's talk about what are some of the triggers for modernization. And so, most of these are fairly intuitive. Hardware refresh is really intuitive. Security threats. You may have a workload or an application built on, let's say, an older version of SQL Server, and all of a sudden your organization has a new security compliance requirement which says, hey, we need to protect this data that this app is storing, both at rest and in motion. Well, capabilities like always encrypted didn't exist in SQL Server 2008. So that might be a reason for you to modernize your database. Same with the hardware, right? You need better performance, you need better security at the hardware layer, and Jake's going to talk about a lot of this. And that may drive the refresh. So these are fairly intuitive, common reasons that we hear from customers of why they're modernizing. But interestingly enough, so when we talked about SQL, the other reason could be end of support. And you may have a compliance requirement within your organization that says, hey, we will not run any software that's unsupported. So as July 9th, 2019 is the end of extended support for SQL Server 2008 and 2008 R2. And what does that mean? Again, that means that you won't get the security updates. You may have, like I talked about, these compliance concerns where you are not maybe compliant with your own company policy of running unsupported software. Same with Windows Server coming in January 14th, 2020, not too far away. So a good time to think about both, you know, how you can modernize that data tier, and then Jake will also talk about the hardware tier and the infrastructure tier. So what are the options that Microsoft has for you if you have SQL Server 2008 or 2008 R2 and are running it? And so one is you can modernize it to Azure. And what we've introduced not too long ago is this capability within Azure SQL Database called Managed Instance. Now, why did we create this? Because our customers were asking for the ability to have a fully managed SQL Server, right? If they're moving it to the cloud, in many cases they said, well, I want to go all the way. I don't want to have to patch this anymore. I don't want to have to patch the OS. I don't want to have to patch the database. I want you to do all of that heavy lifting. I want to focus on the app. And you give me not an only, I want an SLA not just for the infrastructure, but I want an SLA for the database itself. So that's, you know, why we created Azure SQL Database Managed Instances, to make that lift and shift of SQL Server as is from on-premises to a fully managed environment possible. This is very unique out there when we say completely managed, you know, giving you, think about it this way, one of the benefits that customers enjoy that are running in Azure SQL Database is this their last upgrade of SQL Server. They will never have to upgrade again, because that's one of the benefits of running a fully managed service. All of these upgrades, these updates are automatically done. You're automatically on the latest version. And Azure SQL Database Managed Instance also supports older versions of SQL Server, all the way back to SQL Server 2005. Now, if that doesn't work for you, the other option is to move it to infrastructure services and Azure VM in SQL Server. And here we've tried to do a bit more to make life easier as well, like auto patching and things like that. But it's not a fully managed service. We won't give you an SLA for the database. We will give you an SLA for the infrastructure, but managing that database and making sure it's up and running and it's highly available, we'll give you the tools to do it, but those are the tools that you have to manage and drive, right? You will have to use things like always on and so forth, where that concept in Azure SQL Database is HA is built in by default, right? So you have both of these options. The other interesting thing that it's an Azure Hybrid Benefit offer that's unique to Azure is, let's say you have a workload and you simply can't modernize it right now for whatever reason. By moving that workload as is, the SQL Server 2008 or 2008 R2 to Azure SQL VMs, you actually get 3 years of free extended security updates. Okay, so that's significant, because that might be the number one reason you're looking to modernize, but you just need a bit more time, and you can do that, and you can only do that on Azure and Azure SQL VM. So that might be an option for you, but again, we would encourage you that over time, you want to modernize the database when you can, but if you need a bit more time, here's an option for you, so you don't have to, so you can still get the security updates. The other is you can modernize that database on-prem. We have, and I'll talk about SQL Server 2017 in just a bit, and also talk about what's coming in SQL Server 2019. And both of these products run both within your data center as well as in Azure VMs. And remember, all of these innovations are coming from our Azure Data Services, our PaaS services. That's where we innovate, and then we bring those capabilities, to your on-premises products like SQL Server 2017 and 2019. So hopefully that gives you a bit more information on some of the options you have and what we've done to try to make life easier for you. But do want to let you know that end of support is coming if you were not already aware of that. I think most of you are. So let's keep going. All right, so let's talk about what Microsoft has to offer for your data and AI capabilities to run within your data center and your on-premises data center. Essentially, what we've done with SQL Server over the years, and this is, again, the feedback that you've been giving us is, build value and capability into the product. So what we've done is, one, you will have noticed that we are releasing SQL Server more often, and we're introducing capabilities more often than we ever did before. And you might ask, well, why is that? Because we're able, this is, the credit's fully due to Azure, because our engineering teams, now the code base in Azure SQL Database and SQL Server are one and the same. It's one code tree. So engineering develops once, and they develop for Azure, and then those capabilities are deployed across millions of databases. So this notion that used to exist several years ago or a few years ago, which is, hey, I'll take SQL Server, I'll kick the tires, and once SP2 comes out or whatever, I'll deploy it in production. Well, that doesn't, many customers don't need to do that anymore, because these capabilities are already proven in Azure. They're running on live databases with live customer environments, and they can't go down, they can't break. And engineering's invested tons of resources to make sure things like that don't happen. And so when you get these capabilities, within SQL Server, they're battle tested, there are customers running them, and they've been running them for a while. And that's the other advantage you get with running Azure SQL Database, for example. The latest, newest innovation coming in SQL. If you want to see what you want to talk about foresight, you can kind of go look at what's coming in SQL. Just go explore Azure SQL Database and look at the capabilities there and that are being introduced there. The ones that are really popular that our customers are liking will make their way to SQL Server over time. But if you want access to that ahead of that, the first place you'll get it is Azure SQL Database, okay? Because that's where our engineering innovates. And we may ship a box product to you. Right now we're on a cadence. You have 2017, now we have 2019, roughly 18 months or so. That's fairly quick to where we were releasing every 4 or 5 years when you go back to the SQL Server 2012 and 2008 days. So that's the other benefit of cloud computing, is you get access to the latest bits, the latest innovation that Microsoft engineering has to offer. But rest assured that, hey, if you're running this workload on-prem, those capabilities will make their way on premises. So SQL Server 2017. Essentially what we've done here is we've built everything in, okay? And what you'd ask for is, okay, well, I've got both Windows environments now and Linux environments. Well, how are you gonna help me? Well, we, with 2017, support running SQL Server on Linux. Many of you, how many of you would have thunk that 5 years ago that SQL Server would run on Linux? And if you saw Red Hat Summit that happened recently, the innovations continue to increase of what we're bringing and how we're embracing open source, not just within SQL, but as a company. So many of you may ask, well, hey, I've been working with Oracle, I know Java, I don't know .NET. Well, can I use SQL? Yes, you can, because language and the platform you want to deploy on, whether you want to develop on a Mac, deploy on a Linux server, use Java, use your own development tools, all of that works with SQL. So know that. And we've invested, we continue to invest here. We won't let platform that you want to run on get in the way. Now, when it comes to performance, this is where we've seen a great uptick since SQL Server 2016 compared to the Oracles of the world, which had been leading the benchmark for years, both the TPCH and TPCE. But go take a look at those now and see what the top performers are. They're SQL Server, not only on performance, both read and write, but also price performance. And consistently, and customers have been giving that feedback that, look, this thing performs incredibly well. We have case studies where it outperforms Oracle, and the cost is 1/10 of Oracle, and yet you have all of these capabilities built into one SKU that you're buying. So not only can you run OLTP workloads with 2017, both on Windows and Linux, you have BI capabilities, you have Power BI report server included, which gives you the full Power BI experience that's included in your enterprise license. You have R and Python and AI capabilities built in, where you can score this data right there within SQL Server using T-SQL. So essentially, nearly all the workloads you want to go run, right? OLTP, DW, scale out data marts, BI, analytics, AI are included in what you're already buying. You're not buying multiple SKUs, and that's why it's cheaper than both, than the Oracles of the world. The other interesting thing is the stat that's in the middle of the slide, which is the most secure database over the last 8 years. You might go, well, Ramnik, what does that mean? Essentially, this is looking at the National Institute of Standards and Technology and their data on vulnerabilities. And over the last 8 years, SQL Server has been the least vulnerable database. Even has fewer vulnerabilities than some of the competitors, like let's say SAP HANA or even open source databases like PostgreSQL, which may not have been around as long. And so in that time frame, so that's important. And you might ask, well, why is that important? This isn't, if you saw that Equifax issue that happened a couple of years ago, that wasn't a advanced encryption technology that was broken. That was simply a vulnerability that was not patched in time, and the data was exposed. So it's very important. It's not only important in terms of security, it's also important in terms of downtime. Anytime you have to issue a patch, if you look at some of the databases that have all of these patches, that's downtime. So you have to look at that as well. So having fewer vulnerabilities has an impact on both security and downtime. And that's something that, the SQL Server engineering team holds near and dear to their heart and are very proud of. And this is not a particular feature in SQL Server that enables this. This is engineering practices. And if I had one of my engineering colleagues here, they would tell you how the red team and blue team work and how we try to break our own code and all of this to make sure SQL Server is very, very secure. But you'll get that in later sessions today, where we'll deep dive into a lot of this. But essentially, what we're trying to do with SQL Server, it is your data and AI solution within your data center. Everything is built into it. AI is built in, and all these workloads are built in. So you might look at this and go, well, one workload's missing, Ramnik, which is, how do I use SQL Server 2017 or 2016 to do analytics over big data? And that is the one workload we haven't been able to tackle, and we are going to tackle with SQL Server 2019. You will now be able to gain insights across all your data, relational and non-relational, right? So you will be able to gain intelligence over your big data now with SQL Server 2019. In addition, there'll be a lot of great, and many of you attended the past session, so I won't go there, but there's, as always, in every release of SQL Server, performance gets better, security gets better, all of these things will get better. But the big news is analytics over big data. So let me talk a little bit more. And again, there are deeper dive sessions here, but I'll give you an overview. One of the other key things in 2019 is you can now use it as a hub for integrating all of your data. Okay, so that poly-based capability that used to exist, we've taken it to the next level, where now you can use T-SQL to query any data source, whether it's HANA, whether it's Oracle, whether it's Teradata, whether it's Cosmos DB or anything, and do it in a very performant manner because of that caching layer that scales out. You can also cache that data into a scale-out data mart. And so that's very important. So not only can you query it, because the next question you'll ask, well, what's the impact on performance? Well, you can cache that and aggregate over that for your analytics. So this is really interesting and compelling because many of you have all of these data sources. And I'll bet very few of you are saying, hey, we're going to move everything into one data source. I don't think that's a reality. Even if you said that data source was going to be SQL Server, you're not going to migrate everything over into SQL Server. Likely, you will have your SQL servers with your oracles, with your NoSQL, with all of this stuff. Then the question becomes, well, how do I get analytics? Essentially, remember what we talked about at the beginning. Why are customers modernizing their data estate? At least the data that we get is they want to gain more insights, more intelligence over their business. Well, if you're doing that, how do you do that? Right? How do you connect the data that's sitting in Oracle with SQL? Or how do you connect the data that's sitting in Cloudera with SQL? Or another PostgreSQL with SQL? And you can do that now. Right? So this is another powerful capability. Again, we'll deep dive into this in the later sessions. The other is querying over big data. So the key here is Kubernetes. We made a big bet on Kubernetes in 2017, and we're continuing to make a bigger bet as we go forward. So as long as you support that, any Kubernetes platform, you will be able to do this. You will be able to read and write to an HDFS store. You will be able to scale out analytics, scale out compute and storage using this Kubernetes pod. It will ship with Spark included. So if you have machine learning algorithms that are written in Spark, well, guess what? You can run them over this big data using Spark. Or if you have them in R and Python and T-SQL, you can use SQL Server. So the whole idea here is you can now do analytics over big data with SQL Server 2019. The workload that you couldn't do with SQL Server, the one that you've been asking for, you can also do, and you can make it your data hub to integrate all your data. So hopefully, you're taking part in the CTPs, you're downloading them. We're adding more and more capability in every CTP. So we look forward to, bringing this release to you soon, but be sure to engage in the CTP programs. So now let's talk about modernizing your data estate to Azure. What can we do, and what do we do uniquely to help you? So here, what's interesting is, I talked a lot about SQL. I talked a lot about Azure SQL Database. I don't know if I've mentioned Azure SQL Data Warehouse. Essentially, it's that core SQL engine with MPP scale, and Azure SQL Data Warehouse. I don't know if you've checked out the performance of this service. I mean, 3-4 years ago, you might have said, well, gosh, I think Redshift is faster, but no, not anymore. Compare it. I mean, there is no other data warehouse that can perform or come close to the performance of Azure SQL Data Warehouse with the latest release. So if you've done any kind of benchmarks in the past, I encourage you to go try Azure SQL Data Warehouse again and see how well this thing performs. But outside of performance, what else is unique? What about Postgres? Well, you can run Postgres in any cloud. What's so great about running Azure SQL Data? What's great about running the Postgres service on Azure? So again, it comes down to this gray box that you see in this diagram, and which is the Microsoft IP that we're creating in Azure to help our customers uniquely in Azure when it comes to automation, and intelligence. How do we make sure your queries, whether they're in Postgres or whether they're in SQL database, run faster? Can we use some of our machine learning algorithms that we have learned to tune Microsoft databases and apply them to any database that's running in Azure? And the answer is yes. And this is one of the things when you come to the Postgres service, for example, or the MySQL service, that you will gain over just running that MySQL service in any cloud. Security. This is one where Azure Threat Protection, you might go, well, is that just like a antivirus? But really what you're talking about here is the IP, the significant investment Microsoft's made in security IP that actually protects Microsoft, the company itself, is being deployed in Azure Threat Detection to protect our customers' data, right? And so that's very unique IP that you won't find, like in a box product on-prem. And so these are value-added services that we can provide, even in the area of resource governance and governance itself. We're doing innovations here to help you manage that data better than ever before. And these are unique to Azure, and these are across all of our first-party services that we offer, including Postgres, MySQL, MariaDB, SQL database, and data warehouse. So just giving you an overview of, as you're modernizing to the cloud, what are the benefits that Azure is going to give you uniquely when you bring your data to Azure? Okay, so let's go back now to your databases on-prem. A lot of that is SQL. So we kind of covered this in the 2008 R2 discussion on modernizing that. But essentially, you can take any source, and the key is we've introduced this database migration service, which is free, and will help you migrate any source to these appropriate destinations, right? So you can take SQL Server, and we believe if you want a fully managed service, MI is the best destination for it, because it will be your last upgrade of SQL Server. It will give you these built-in capabilities like that I talked about. It will give you the value-added security that I talked about, and an SLA for the database itself. Now, if you want just an SLA for the infrastructure and you want to manage the database yourself, you can also migrate it to Azure VMs. We have more performant VMs being added all the time. You can run Linux VMs, you can run Windows VMs, and like I said, we've done some things to make your life easier, such as auto patching and auto backup, and made it easier to deploy your availability groups. So things that we've done, we've written scripts to make you do that. To make your life easier. So VMs are also a good choice, but again, you have to decide what you want, and we're here to help. And then the same exists, for MySQL, PostgreSQL, and MariaDB. And even if you're NoSQL databases, Cosmos DB, even though it's not listed here, is a great destination for all of your NoSQL databases, whether it's Mongo or Cassandra. You can lift and shift those using database migration service directly to Cosmos DB in Azure. Okay, so now let's talk about a couple of case studies of why are customers modernizing. And so here we have Intershop, who's an ISV in e-commerce, and I met with them, and they're based out of Germany, and their situation is very unique, and they have a lot of clientele in Europe, and some of their clientele want to consume their ISV app within their data center, and others want to consume it through cloud computing and are open to that. And the other thing their requirement was, hey, Intershop's requirement was, well, how do we get improved performance and security from where we are today? I think they were on Oracle before, and also give our customers choice. And this is why they picked the SQL platform and the Microsoft Data Platform, because essentially now, because we have a common code base with our fully managed Azure SQL Database Service and SQL Server, they can develop one application and give the customers choice. Hey, do you want to deploy this within your data center and run it within your data center? No problem. It's tied to SQL Server. And do you want to run it in a fully managed environment where we take care of the backup? And it gives the Intershop a chance to provide these value-added services that says, hey, we will give you an SLA for not just the infrastructure but the databases as well, and they can use Azure SQL Database. And the thing is, they don't have to rewrite their app because it's a common code base. Always encrypted, works in both places. Encryption at rest works in both places. These features of SQL Server work in both places. And so that's the reason why Intershop picked SQL and the Microsoft Data Platform over Oracle, because their customers appreciated that, and their cost for their end customers for purchasing the database went down significantly from Oracle. So that was another benefit. So that's one example. Another pretty obvious, the industry Komatsu is in with this photograph. But again, it was efficiency, right? We talked about that Keystone research, and that study showed that the companies that are embracing cloud data and AI in a big way are far more efficient and are better in operating income and operating margin. Well, here's another example, right? So Komatsu immediately, when they moved all of their SQL database to a managed incident environment where they no longer have to, do the backups, the patching, all of that automation is there, the securities around that data, they realized 49% cost savings, and they saw a boost in performance because Azure SQL database and managed instance are very efficient. They're taking advantage of cloud scale and cloud computing. So another example of a company that is modernizing and gaining benefits. Okay, so now let's talk about, and I hinted a bit on this, Cosmos DB and globally distributed data. So this is very unique. There may be applications that you have that require global distribution, where you need instantaneous updates globally across, let's say, for your retail website. And you want to be able to, ingest any kind of data. You want, support, you want to run NoSQL databases, you want to run Mongo or Cassandra, you can do that. Cosmos DB is globally distributed, it's multi-model and has multi-API. It gives you a choice of consistency level, so again, you can optimize for performance and making sure refreshes are date, or you can optimize for data concurrency and data accuracy, and you can do that. It offers elastic scale out, and what's very unique is in the industry, it offers industry-leading SLA where we guarantee less than 10 milliseconds read and write latency. No other database out there does that. And if you're concerned about cost, know that it's 3x cheaper than DynamoDB or Google Spanner. So it's a great choice for your NoSQL databases. It runs them really well, and as I mentioned before, you can lift and shift those using database migration service directly to Cosmos DB. So we talked about retail, and ASOS is a great example, and this was very interesting hearing them talk about this and why they selected Cosmos DB. And I learned some things that I didn't know about retail. So for example, what was interesting to find was the amount of window of time you have in retail to make an intelligent recommendation before the customer or the end user migrates away from that recommendation. And it's shocking how small that window of time is. It's 180 milliseconds. Okay, so now you will immediately start to hopefully intuitively see that the value of Cosmos DB. If, for example, the database takes up, let's say, 120 milliseconds of that latency, if you have only 180 millisecond window and the database takes 120, well, you only have 60 milliseconds to make a machine learning, AI recommendation. How good do you think that recommendation will be versus having a window of 170 milliseconds where Cosmos DB is guaranteeing you less than 10 millisecond latency? Their recommendation will be better, significantly better. You can run more sophisticated models. And that's why ASOS picked Cosmos DB, is that at the end of the day, the end customer, the better recommendation you make, the more likely they are to buy. So it again comes back down to what we talked about earlier. All of these investments go back down to intelligence, BI, AI, making better recommendations, better experiences for your customers. And that's why ASOS is investing in Azure Cosmos DB, and they love it. Okay, so let's keep on going and let's talk about analytics in Azure, right? So we talked about SQL Server's got analytics built in on-prem. You've got BI capabilities. You've got, we talked about M, R, and Python and all of that. But what about in Azure? What do we have? So essentially, this is a very simple diagram, but it tells you what each one of these services, what's its sweet spot, and what does it really do. And each of them do it really well in terms of versus the competition. And I already talked about Azure SQL Data Warehouse. There isn't a commercial solution in the cloud that outperforms this service. But essentially, you have the ability to ingest data in Azure, store it, prep it, serve it, and report on it on any kind of a mobile device or any device you want with Power BI. So essentially, you have Azure Data Factory and Azure Data Lake Storage, Databricks, Data Warehouse, and Power BI, and each of these serve this particular purpose, and they do it very well. And so again, wanted to give you kind of an overview, and again, later on you'll get more insights into some of these services, a deeper dive and a closer look at each one of them, but wanted to give you an overview of what each one does and what its purpose is. So with that, I would now like to pass the floor to Jake, my colleague from Intel, and he'll talk to you about innovations coming from Intel that will help you modernize your data estate. So with that, the floor is yours, Jake.
Thanks, Ramnik. I certainly appreciate being here. The journey that we have been on over the last 20 years together as data scientists has really transformed the industry. And for Intel, it really has transformed the way we've thought about building our solutions with Microsoft. And so we've transformed what was essentially a CPU or central processing unit company under the Andy Grove era, the Craig Barrett era, and certainly under Paul Ottolini's leadership, to one focused on a data center future. Ramnik was really, really clear. We're seeing this all over the world. Is it 163 zettabytes or is it 175 zettabytes by 2025? I don't know, but I know the difference between 163 and 175 is 12 zettabytes, and that's a meaningful amount of data that as data scientists and professionals, we have to help move, store, and process. And so, for us, we've really built three key product portfolios that we've optimized to run in Azure, to run in the cloud, whether it is an Azure or Azure SQL database affiliate, meaning another service provider, as well as on-premise for enterprises and service providers and comm service providers around the world. What does that mean? That means that we're optimizing our Ethernet technologies to include RDMA capabilities, which is critical for Azure and Azure SQL Services. We're optimizing for silicon photonics in next generation data centers to ensure that we have 400 gig optimizations in the cloud. We're optimizing for where appropriate OmniPath fabric in HPC environments for large databases in those worlds. Ramnik talked about the performance of TPC H and TPC-E and where Microsoft SQL sits today. We're able to do that because we're now able to create a new memory hierarchy, which I'll talk about more with Optane technologies, both Optane data center solid state drives, which have been in market for a couple of years, and then recently introduced April 2nd of this year, Optane data center persistent memory. I like to say a 10-year journey that was an overnight success. And then many of you know about our processor family, the Xeon Platinum, Xeon Scalable Platinum family, the 8280 that we just introduced this month in April, that is capable of up to 56 cores in our Cascade Lake AP, in our Xeon second generation Xeon Scalable processor family, AP family. We have up to 56 cores available. But we also have an FPGA product line that is quite successful, and we continue to be excited about our work with Nirvana and building a neural network processor, and we're working with Movidius who is now part of Intel for a visual processing unit, and then we have our scaled down version of the Xeon core in Atom, of course. And we bring that all together with Intel Select Solutions, and I'll talk a little bit more about the work that we've done with the SQL team here. But I think it's critical to understand that as you modernize your data estate, know that Intel is building solutions to move, store, and process everything that your data will require, and it's optimizing all of those to run SQL and to run in Microsoft Azure environments. So let's talk about the second generation Intel Xeon Scalable processor. Again, we've got over 50 standard SKUs available from all the major OEMs and local service providers who build servers worldwide. Dell, HPE, Lenovo, all of them offering Xeon second generation Xeon Scalable processors. We've got several custom SKUs that exist throughout the industry. But let's talk about the new innovative technologies that I'm really excited about. And the reason I'm so excited about these technologies is, as Ramnik mentioned, the lifting and sifting of data needs to happen at sub-microseconds. We like to say, if we can run everything at 10 microseconds or better, then we're going to make the world exponentially faster every single day. With the new Xeon Scalable processor, second generation, the 9200 processor series has up to 56 cores per socket. We can, with our new Optane data center persistent memory, which I'll talk about how SQL takes advantage of that later, we're able to do up to 4.5 terabytes of memory per socket. And unlike our competitors in the industry, we're able to scale from 1 socket to 8 sockets in a single server node. That gives us the capability to really scale up your database with huge performance. We talked about caching. We talked about the ability to process data from whichever kind of DB database you're deploying. We talked about processing that as close to the customer as possible. Now you have that ability to put terabytes and terabytes of data as close to the edge or as close to the processing as possible. We've also added a artificial intelligence feature known as Deep Learning Boost. That capability will give us a deep learning performance enhancement over our previous generation that is outstanding. And we've added speed select technology as well. And then we've got network optimized SKUs for our comm service providers, what we've built, and cloud optimized SKUs that you'll see featured in Azure. Ramnik talked about security. This platform is the most secure platform that we've ever introduced. We've introduced additional security mitigations as well as new security technologies and in continued enhancements in our advanced encryption, continued enhancements in our trusted execution technology and virtualization technologies as well. So let's talk about faster query performance and why does it matter. Our work with SQL has allowed us to take what we thought was a pretty good machine, right? 33,000 queries per hour at a 1 terabyte scale factor with a 4-year-old system. Now today, we can, with the 2nd generation Intel Xeon Scalable processor, we're able to deliver 836,261 queries per hour at 1 terabyte of scale. Okay, so a 4-year-old system, which most of you have deployed. I know that because I work with many of you on a regular basis. Most of you have deployed this. By upgrading and modernizing to the new hardware, it's a 24.8x performance enhancement. I will tell you, you know, mileage does vary depending on the database, and we've seen the mileage get much better. But this is what our legal team allows us to say, and so we say 24.8x, and we can replicate that on a regular basis. Like all the things we do at Intel, we're very open to peer review, and we're very open to showing you how to get the best performance. And our work with SQL has allowed us, as Ramnik has pointed out, to be able to extend that performance wherever you need to process your data. So why is it so important, and how do you get all of that performance? When you start to think about 163 to 175 zettabytes of data, you have to start thinking about, how do I categorize that data if you aren't already, and how do I look at my warehouse? Some information is valuable and other information isn't valuable, but data has gravity. What does that mean? Today, if you actually have a solution, you will actually have the opportunity to take the data and set it aside. And you're not going to put that data in memory. Why would you do that? That's a very costly transaction. You're going to want to put that down in what we call the hard disk drive or tape tier. Why is that really important to be down there? Because you need to have the lowest cost per gigabyte, terabyte, or zettabyte possible. Okay, and then there's another level. We call this the NAND level. That's what the low end of flash, but it's high capacity flash. We've developed technologies in 3D NAND to deliver efficient storage here. Okay, then there's a warm tier of SSDs. We kind of say this is your tier of SATA SSDs, where you're really going to have that next tier of cost structure. You're going to get that next tier of performance. And then we've introduced this new Optane Data Center solid state drive technology. Why is it so important? Because it has incredible endurance like nothing that we've ever introduced before, and we're able to give it an incredible performance. We talked about the performance of 24.8x with SQL. Well, databases love Optane, and SQL in particular is built to take advantage of that through direct access and persistent memory technology. We've also added an improving memory capacity. We talked about having up to 4.5 terabytes of available memory in an individual socket. With this additional capacity, you get this with Optane Data Center persistent memory. And persistent memory allows us to give a more direct access to the SQL database, to memory, and increase its performance, reducing all of the other instructions that are actually wasted instructions. Because of the optimizations, those instructions are now carried forward through this direct access memory capability. So, like I said, it was an innovation, an overnight success story. And I joke to people, I say it's an overnight success story because it only took us 10 years of really focused and committed effort to change memory architectures. And it only took us 10 years to work very closely with the SQL team, the Ramnik's team, and the Azure team to ensure that they were ready for this technology when we introduced it. So let's talk a little bit about Intel Select Solutions. Intel Select Solutions was really developed in partnership with our friends at Microsoft. First, we optimized around a technology known as Azure Stack. Then we worked very closely with Ramnik and his team around SQL. To date, we've developed with over 8 OEMs, 5 different versions of select solutions based upon the generation of hardware that you want to modernize on, based upon the generation of software that you want to modernize on. We're also working very closely with Ramnik and his team to then replicate those environments in Azure. So now you have the flexibility to have your environment, whether it's on-premise, whether it's at a colo provider, or it's in the Microsoft Azure data infrastructure. You now have that flexibility with unparalleled hardware performance, as well as optimized and verified benchmarks so that you know what you're getting when you buy it. So let's talk a little bit about what those select solutions are and how we're making it easy. On the analytics side, we have a first generation Intel Xeon Scalable processor family for Microsoft SQL Server that's available today from multiple OEMs. And now we just introduced a second generation Microsoft SQL Server with Windows Server select solution this year. In addition, later this year, we're going to introduce Microsoft SQL Server with Linux. These capabilities also allow us to continue to optimize our hybrid cloud offerings around Microsoft Azure Stack, Microsoft Azure Stack HCI, formerly known as Windows Server Software Defined, and work with multiple OEMs across the ecosystem and Microsoft to ensure that wherever your database is being processed, wherever you choose to deploy your modernized infrastructure, it will be compatible and optimized to work with SQL. Why is that important? Because many of you are out there deploying with capabilities to take multi-tenant virtualization and consolidation as part of your efforts. We took a workload, the OLTP Cloud Benchmark, and we were able to deliver 27% hardware cost performance optimizations by going to our new memory architecture while increasing the amount of available memory and VM capabilities that you have with 500 microsecond latencies, with less than 500 microsecond latencies. Ramnik talked about the importance of those latencies, and now you can see that when you put it all together, when you optimize for the central processing unit, when you optimize your database to be optimized for memory capabilities, when you optimize your networking capabilities and you optimize your storage, you now have the ability to deliver cost improvements generation over generation. And as Ramnik mentioned, it's very important to understand with the new data structure and the ability to actually move data as quickly as we can today, and the requirements to be as in tune to data with your customers, it's critically important that you take advantage of the latest technologies when you monetize your data center. So let's talk about a direct access example and what happens to the runtime environment when you take a DAX example with SQL in a 30 terabyte data warehouse. You get a 56% reduction in runtime and 129% increase in query throughput. This is our first attempt together to deliver our first generation. Each generation of SQL and Xeon scalable processors optimized for this new DAX capability with Optane data center persistent memory will continue to improve on performance. I will tell you, a 56% reduction in runtime, while it was really good, our team was hoping for better, and future generations, our team is committed to deliver better performance as well. And then finally, I want to take you back to something that is near and dear to my heart. For those who have been doing benchmarking in the industry platforms for a long time, and I began my journey about the same time, 25 years ago, in database technologies, working in 1994. I began working on my first SQL work. And it was very, very challenging. And then I moved to a company called Sequent Computer Systems, and we worked on SQL on a regular basis and partnered very closely with Microsoft. And as as the Intel server processor architecture matured, I was fortunate enough to be able to join Intel to continue to expand our server processor product line and participate in some wonderful innovations there. But never in my career were we able to show a demonstration like we were able to show at Microsoft Ignite in the fall of last year. We took our very latest Intel second generation processors. We took 384 gig of Samsung memory, our good partner. We took two 28-core 8260 Xeon Scalable processors, 1.5 terabytes of Intel Optane data center persistent memory as cache, 32 terabytes of NVMe, Intel Data Center P4500 10s as capacity. We took our two 25 gig RDMA Columbiaville NICs. We took the very latest build from Microsoft, and we were able to deliver a world record 13.798 million IOPS, 4K random 100% read. Never before in any of our careers in working with Microsoft had we been able to do this. The ability to demonstrate this performance, the ability to optimize on SQL has shown, I believe, the industry that a new architecture is upon us. Hybrid cloud is very, very real. And we can not only deliver the most performant solutions that mankind has ever seen, we can do it and replicate it over and over again. And so as data scientists, this is a very exciting time because we know that we've now broken through the next barrier and we have an opportunity to absorb, process, and take value out of that 160 plus zettabytes of data that we're going to have to be able to manage in 2025. So you take a look at some of these maximum throughputs, okay? A read at 535 gigabits per second. I mean, these are just unbelievable. When we did maximum IOPS, you get, 4K random, 90% read, 10% write, still at 9.5 million IOPS. Just an amazing benchmark, amazing work by our teams, taking advantage of what is now known as Azure HCI, but what was formerly known as Windows Server, and taking advantage of new records. So with that, I'd like to hand it back to Ramnik and talk about, starting our migration journey today and answer maybe any questions that the audience might have that they've heard this morning.
Thanks, Jake. So if there's any remaining questions, we can try and tackle those. But if not, you can get your questions to us and we can take them afterwards as well.
Okay, hi guys. So there are a couple of questions. We've got a couple of very hardware-specific questions from a upstanding community member called Glenn Berry, who is well known for his expertise in this area. Hopefully you can answer these ones. Are there any first-tier server vendors going to make systems with Xeon 9300 series processors?
Yeah, there are. 9200. We don't have the 9300 series yet. Not that we won't, but we don't. It's 9200 series. But yes, there are several OEMs who will be making servers available for the 9200 series. You can send me an email at jake.smith@intel.com, and I'm happy to provide that information to you as it becomes available.
Excellent. So the next one from Glenn is he asked why there isn't a 6-core Xeon Gold 6228 replacement for the Xeon Gold 6128.
Very specific. Each frequency, yeah. So that's an excellent question, and I love very specific questions. But the way we do our slotting is based upon what we call comparable performance leveling. And so from each generation, we're trying to get a comparable performance level, but we want customers to experience the full value of the platform. And so sometimes there's trade-offs where we're not able to get what I call an apples for apples. So you won't be able to buy a 6148 is not a apples to apples to a 6248 because we had to make some trade-offs, and it's not apples to apples. But usually we do a really, really good job there. I'm happy to look into it for Glenn, and happy to answer any of his questions. He can just send me an email directly.
Okay, great. We had a couple of Oracle questions. It's probably better I ask them all together, and then you can respond. So the first question we got asked was, will Oracle be supported in Azure database? And the response by Anshul was that it's not on the roadmap in the future. But then we've had a follow-up that's saying that we can still, well, we presume we can still deploy Oracle database on Azure VM leveraging IaaS. And the final question for Oracle there is that for any Oracle customers wanting to move into and benefit from Azure, is the best path to go to is Azure database for Postgres?
Yeah, so this is Ramnik. So let's answer the second question. The first one, I think it was addressed properly in terms of SQL database, but you can run Oracle in Azure VMs as today, so that's not a problem. And again, you get advantage of all of the other things that I talked about that Azure has to offer when you do that. So that's definitely possible. And then for Postgres, I'll have to get back to you on that. I know that that's in this discussion, but I don't have the answer to that right off. So, my email address will also be available. Please send that question to me, and I will get a answer for you.
Okay, great. Right. There's a fairly generic question here. So in your vulnerabilities chart, this was a slide, I think quite early on, where you listed SQL Server as being ranked substantially the most secure between 2010 to 2018. What survey was that based upon?
It's the it's available on the National Institute of Standards and Technology. They do a survey every year. They conduct it. They explain the methods that they do it. So you can go to their site and they will give you the latest survey of vulnerabilities where they test for vulnerabilities. So all of that's available on their site. So National Institute of Standards and Technology.
Great. Given the multi-platform support of SQL Server now, so obviously SQL Server on Linux and the Windows platform, how much does this affect your integration testing and release patch cycles? How difficult is it?
Well, I don't know if I'm the best person to speak to that. I think maybe somebody from engineering would probably give you a more accurate, I mean, in marketing, I'm not doing those roles. So I don't think you want to even hear my advice on that. So let's get again, you can send that question to me and let's get a response from engineering because they're the ones that are actually having to go through that.
Okay, great. So we're on the last question now. So if anybody else wants to ask something quickly whilst I ask this, then please do so now. Right, so finally, you talked about external table support. Does that mean that linked servers are no longer necessary now in 2019?
Yeah, so external tables are how Polybase works, and that's how you kind of can essentially map your SQL Server data with any other data and do that. So that's the Polybase feature. Linked servers, again, let me get back to you on that. Send me that question and I can follow up there.
Okay, fantastic. Right, well, I can't see any other questions come in, so I just want to say thank you very much, guys. It's been really, really educational. And I would like to just tell everyone to stay tuned for our next session, Microsoft SQL Server 2019 Big Data Clusters Architecture with Buck Woody. So tune in for that one. Buck is a great presenter and a very knowledgeable guy. So I hope you enjoyed today's session. Thank you everyone for attending, and thank you both for presenting.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.